Sorry, let me
go. Good morning, everybody in the Virtual Business Owners Network on Friday, the 9th of September. And we're delighted to have Damien Traynor, who's the Managing Director of Ambit Compliance, making a presentation called GDPR, What's the Big Deal? Many thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I suppose GDPR, what's the big deal? I suppose the big deal, is it's still around, and it's now in existence for over 4 years, and it's not going to go away. So this morning, I just have a little brief agenda here. Some of the areas that people may not necessarily know an awful lot about, and just bring that to your attention. So we're going to talk a little bit about e-privacy, website compliance, credit card processing, a little bit on cybersecurity, and maybe give some takeaways in relation to the GDPR. So, you know, I'm not going to read through this, but these are, I suppose, the main parts of the regulation. You know, as I said, it came into force on the 25th of May, 2018, and it applies to everybody, you know, within the EU. If you're operating within the EU, you know, large or small organizations, there's no differentiation between rules applying to larger organizations and not applying to smaller. It applies to all equally. So what's the big deal? So it's the law. That's the first one. It's not something that you have a choice in as to whether or not you want to be involved in or participate in. It is the law, and it is getting more and more embedded into day-to-day operations of business. You know, and some of the impacts that it has had is, you know, around businesses, you know, a rise in data breach reporting. And so some organizations, you know, have been falling foul of this, where maybe they decided that they weren't going to report it, but it is becoming such a part. If you don't report it, it's likely that somebody else is going to report it. And that will then have an even further negative impact on you. So subject access requests. So this is where people request information from you. And these are very, very difficult for organizations to deal with. They can be very, very taxing on resources and can be very complicated. So what we do with organizations, I suppose, is to help them to be in a very good place that when they are asked for these, that it doesn't have a major impact to their business by having good processes and procedures in place. For example, you have an access request from somebody. You could find out that you have 40, 50, 100,000 references to that person within your system between emails and other communications, etc. So that's very, very difficult to go through, particularly if you have to start to redact information out of that before you pass that information on to the person who has requested it. So these are very, very challenging to deal with. Fines across Europe are increasing for data breaches. So other bodies are really, other data protection or regulatory bodies across Europe are really putting a lot of pressure on the Irish Data Protection Commission to increase fines and to increase the number of fines and the value of those fines. So the DPC now regularly are issuing fines against organizations. So, and they've ranged from 1,500 to 405 million, which is the most recent one that you would have heard about in the news there this week, which was for Instagram. But that one for the 1,500, that was for a very, very small charity, a men's support charity called Move. You know, very, very small body. Very little harm done in the data breach that they had, but it was felt that they were out of control, so they were effectively made an example of. But this is becoming more and more common with smaller businesses, and I suppose people see these large fines related to Facebook and Google and all of these organizations, and they think, well, that doesn't really apply to me, but it does. And where the DPC may not be coming down to fine you, these other areas around the data access requests, also personal cases that are being taken by people for non-response to subject access requests, these may not end up in court because usually there's settlements outside of court. But these are happening all the time and much more than people would actually realize. And I suppose data protection is becoming a major risk to business. So, you know, it should be up there in everybody's risk register, just the same as health and safety and all of these other areas. So most common complaints to DPC, just going through them very briefly: subject access requests not being dealt with. CCTV, huge area. You know, unsolicited marketing, another one that we could have in there, you know, and all of those areas around the data unfairly being collected, etc., being shared, you know, and the old practice of buying client lists and things like that, they're all part of common complaints now to the DPC. So e-privacy, I'm not sure if anyone has even heard of e-privacy, but e-privacy has been around for a very long time. It's also known as the cookie law. And this is actually an area where most of the DPC fines have been for years through the prosecutions under this. So this specifically relates to your websites and also to marketing and unsolicited communications. So, and there are areas in around there, you know, not unsubscribing people, etc., are the challenges. So things around e-privacy to help yourself, I suppose, is to, you know, have a good, clean marketing database. You know, if you're not dealing with people, you should just get them off your list, because they're only really a burden to you in the longer run. Understand how opt-outs and opt-ins work, and making sure that people are able to unsubscribe when they do. And there's been lots of cases where organizations have had, you know, they're unsubscribed and they're taken off the list, and then they're automatically re-added back to the list 3 months later through an algorithm, or 6 months later, so you start getting the same information again. This is the sort of stuff that's under a lot of investigation from the DPC, and ultimately ends up in fines or private cases being taken by people. And this affects very small organizations. This isn't, you know, I know of one case. This relates to a hairdressing small group of three or four shops where, you know, they effectively ended up in court, in the local circuit court, you know, over people still receiving information even though they had unsubscribed twice. So it applies to small organizations as well. So know what cookies you have, and you know, for, you know, maybe some website people or developers on here, this is an area, you know, most people have websites. It's something that you should be building in when you're starting to look for a new website, that you should be getting this information off your developer, that they should be considering all of these things before they set up your website, as opposed to, you know, retrospectively trying to figure out what cookies are set up on your site. You know, this should all be built in as part of your package, and something that we end up dealing with a lot of times, where companies have bought their website and then they have no idea how it functions, you know, or even where the back end is. You know, is it within the EU? Is it in India? You know, where is it built? All of those kind of things are really, really important. So I appreciate there's a lot going into this, so I just want to cover these things a little bit. So further on the website compliance, SSL search, really, really important. Also, these things all affect your searchability within Google as well. If you're not seen as a trusted site, you know, you don't come up in the searches as well. So other reasons for it to be good. So have a good privacy policy on your website, and as I said, around your cookies, know what you have there, how they work. And, you know, my other big tip on that there is to have contact forms, and there's a big trend going towards contact forms because it reduces spam, because of the number of spam emails you'll get into your info box, etc. It just makes them unusable practically, because it's very, very difficult to find the important information in there. So credit card processing, again, something, an area that people may not think of as related to GDPR or data protection. But again, really, really important, and there are specific regulations around having, you know, your PCI compliance up to date. And, you know, as more and more businesses are taking payments online, etc., you know, it's really, really important to have good processes and procedures, and make sure that your staff and your team know how to operate it and are following good practices. You know, we've had incidents where, you know, companies have had a list of people with their credit card details for convenience, for when they're reordering things, you know, which is just an absolute no-no. Really, really dangerous place to be. Cybersecurity gets a lot of publicity. I suppose it's you know, people I suppose associate cybersecurity, I suppose, is maybe more important than GDPR or data protection, but they're actually intricately linked together. You know, data protection is about the processes, procedures. I suppose when we're getting involved in organizations, we look at, you know, what training they have around, you know, their processes and procedures for handling external information. You know, how do they have any training in terms of recognizing what suspicious emails, etc., look like? You know, are they updating their passwords? All of those sort of things fall under kind of our remit in terms of policy procedure type operation. The technical stuff we hand over to the cybersecurity or the IT specialists, but these are the things that we look at, you know, when we're getting involved or doing audits on clients. You know, do they have a bring your own device policy? Like, this is a big, big space now. And also, I suppose the big one around here at the moment is obviously all the remote working. You know, what kind of security systems are set up within organizations to make sure that they're not vulnerable to those employees who are working from home, and to make sure that they have good practices in place. You know, all of that good stuff. These are the things that we check for. You know, remote working, using VPNs. Are they backing up their systems? And are they actually backing up their systems? Because lots of organizations think that they are actually have all of this in place. But when we get in and start looking, we usually find out that they don't, or it's not as good as they thought it was. And lots of organizations just throw this back to their IT company, that, you know, and have an expectation that their IT company, who they're paying very, very, very little, are doing all of this sort of stuff for them. And let's face it, your IT systems are the lifeblood of your organization. You know, that's what makes everything tick. And it's amazing to see how little people will invest in ensuring that their IT system is up to scratch and that they have these basic things in place to protect themselves. So some of the key takeaways, I suppose, is, you know, have a documented policy or procedure. It doesn't matter what size of an organization you have to have something in place that, you know, shows you've acknowledged the GDPR, you've acknowledged e-privacy, you've acknowledged these regulations. And, you know, it has to be just something basic that reflects your organization, not a policy that sits on a shelf somewhere never to be looked at. It has to be something that reflects your organization. You know, again, AROPA is the term that's used within, you know, you're obliged under the GDPR regulation, which is the law, to have AROPA in place. So that's effectively a data map of your organization and the systems within your organization. So where your information is held, what's controlling it, who has access to it, all of that type of information. And this is really, really important when it comes to dealing with a subject access request, where you have to provide that information to someone, that you know where it is, you know how to get to it, you know who has access to it. So have a good privacy policy, which I've mentioned. You know, do due diligence on your data processors, you know, your IT companies, whoever is holding and handling information on your behalf, because if they're weak, or if they don't have good systems, they can cause you a big problem. Make sure you have a contract in place with them, not just a commercial contract, but a contract around your data protection. You know, have good housekeeping in place. So, you know, not leaving information around, not carrying information around. And, you know, you look at around law, the courts, and people are going around with files belonging to, with people's lives written in them and leaving them willy-nilly sitting in coffee shops and behind them and stuff like that. You just can't do that. It's just not acceptable under this legislation. But I suppose most importantly is to have, at a minimum, to be able to demonstrate that you've taken some action. You know, we all talk about people being on a journey, and you can't go in and just turn an organization inside out. But to be able to show that you're on a journey, you've got some processes in place to keep your systems moving forward, and that you're working your way through a list of activities. So that's a very, very brief whistle-stop tour of some of the areas of data protection that maybe people don't think a lot about. And I've tried to cram a lot in there into a very, very short space of time. And any one of those subjects you could spend an hour on by itself. But thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.